This woman might be one of the most evil women who ever lived. Is she a serial killer? No. But what she did is as horrific as any serial killer has done. This is Gertrude Baniszewski. Her full name is Gertrude Nadine von Fassen Baniszewski. She sometimes went by the alias Gertrude Wright. She made the world a whole lot better by dying in 1990. She made it worse by being born in 1928 and what she would do later. She and some of her spawn, along with neighbors, would commit one of the most gruesome crimes in Indiana history, in American history, in history, period. Sylvia Marie Lakin was the middle child of 5. Her parents were carnival workers. She had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, Daniel, Diana, Benny, and Jenny. Jenny had a limp and wore a steel brace as a result of polio. When the family traveled from carnival to carnival, Sylvia and Jenny often stayed with relatives, usually their grandmother. Sylvia was a friendly, outgoing, and confident young woman who friends called Cookie. She sometimes made money babysitting or doing other chores and gave some of the money to her family to help out, given that the family frequently had financial difficulties. She was very protective of Jenny, loved the Beatles, and roughed house with her brothers. It's how she lost a tooth. By all accounts, she was a responsible and caring youth. Sylvia and Jenny knew Paula and Stephanie Baniszewski from their high school, Arsenal Technical High School in Indianapolis. The family was about to be off to another carnival season, and the girls' father arranged for Gertrude to take in and care for his 2 daughters while they were away for $20 a week from shortly after the Independence Day holiday until November 1965. At first, things were going very well. Sylvia helped out around the house. Stephanie and Sylvia got along well and often sang pop songs together while listening to records. The girls went to Sunday school with the Baniszewski kids as well. After 2 weeks, though, the $20 payments began to come late by a day or two, and that is when the abuse started. Gertrude began to spank the girls on their bare buttocks with a paddle. In August, Sylvia and Jenny were beaten on their backs with the paddle after Paula Baniszewski accused them of eating too much food at a church dinner the kids had all attended. For a variety of reasons that are difficult to comprehend, Baniszewski began to target Sylvia for abuse. She made Sylvia eat leftovers and often made her eat spoiled food out of the garbage. She was accused of stealing candy and punished. She was punished for telling the others that she had a boyfriend in Long Beach and that she had once laid under the covers with him. It seems from trial testimony that Sylvia was actually referring to something far more innocent, but Baniszewski would then try to humiliate her by suggesting she was getting big and must be pregnant. She then turned and kicked Sylvia in the genitals. Paula, 3 months pregnant herself, would join in the abuse, knocking her off a chair onto the floor and telling her that she was not fit to sit in a chair. While the family was having supper once, Baniszewski, Paula, and a neighbor boy named Randy Gordon, leper, force-fed Sylvia a hot dog that was loaded with spices and mustard and ketchup. Sylvia vomited the forced meal and was then forced to eat her vomit. The girls in the house, along with Baniszewski, were referring to Sylvia as a prostitute. And so, as a way of venting frustration and standing up for herself, she told people at the high school that Paula and Stephanie were both prostitutes. After a boy propositioned Stephanie and told her about the rumor, Sylvia would admit to starting it. Stephanie then punched Sylvia, and they both ended up crying, with Sylvia apologizing. But Stephanie's boyfriend heard the rumor too. Boy Randolph Hubbard, who was 15, attacked Sylvia, slamming her head into a wall, flipping her onto the floor, and slapping her. When Baniszewski found out what happened, She got out her paddle and beat Sylvia as well. Paula would also beat Sylvia once so hard that she broke her own wrist, and then she would brag about that. She would use her cast to beat Sylvia some more. While Baniszewski was beating Sylvia, she would go into rants about how filthy women were, how Sylvia was a prostitute, and how dirty prostitutes were. She would sometimes have Jenny hit Sylvia and beat Jenny whenever she failed to comply with the demand. Can you imagine? Back to Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Hubbard. He would come to the house frequently to torment Sylvia, and he would bring his friends along. Baniszewski encouraged the neighborhood kids to do this, using her as a sort of practice dummy, allowing them to cut her, burn her skin with cigarettes, and cause severe injuries to her genitals. She was forced to strip naked in front of the teens and Baniszewski and perform sexual acts with a glass bottle. Baniszewski would tell Sylvia that she had to do this to prove to Jenny what kind of girl her sister was. Sylvia ended up stealing a gym suit from her high school because Baniszewski refused to purchase one for her. When she confessed this, Baniszewski forbade her from going to school again and whipped her with a 3-inch wide belt. In a frenzy, she began again kicking Sylvia in the genitals and ranting about premarital sex. Apparently, Stephanie, instead of tormenting the girl on this one occasion, tried to intervene, but the abuse continued. Baniszewski got hold of some matches and burned Sylvia's fingertips and then whipped her with the belt some more. In September, Sylvia told her older sister that she was hungry, and the elder sister gave her a sandwich to eat. Marie Baniszewski was there when the girl ate her sandwich and told the family all about it. Pretty inert, right? Baniszewski accused Sylvia of gluttony, and then she and Paula pounced, choking and bludgeoning the girl. They then forced her into a scalding bath to cleanse her from her sins. Weak by now, whenever she fainted, Baniszewski would grab her by the hair and slam her head into the side of the tub to wake her up and force the girl to endure the torture. The girls were terrified to tell anyone what was happening at the house for fear it would only get worse. Jenny was unable to do anything to protect or help her sister. Even when their parents visited in July, August, and October, no one told them what was happening. In September, though, they met their older sister Diana in a park and told her everything. At first, Diana believed the claims were exaggerated. A neighbor would phone the school to anonymously report that an abused girl with open sores all over her body was living with the Baniszewskis. School nurse came by to check on Sylvia, but Baniszewski merely claimed that she ran away and that, yes, she was full of sores because she was dirty and refused to maintain personal hygiene. That was good enough for the school, and they did not look into it any further. The next door neighbors, Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion, knew what was happening. They had witnessed some of the abuse. Baniszewski also boasted of it to them, and they saw black eyes on Sylvia, but they never reported it. Diana would come to the house around October 1st or so, but Baniszewski refused to let her in. It would be shortly after this visit that Sylvia became incontinent due to the stress and the torture. So evil Baniszewski responded by refusing her access to a bathroom. She was forced to wet herself, and then she would be punished for wetting herself. She was thrown into the basement and tied up down there, usually kept naked, without much food and water. Sometimes Baniszewski would rig her to the railing of the stairs in a way that her feet could barely touch the ground. She began charging neighborhood children 5 cents a head to see Sylvia's body, to beat her, scald her, burn her, humiliate her, and mutilate her. 5 cents a head to a psychopath to turn children into instruments of further torture. She would have the neighborhood kids and her own kids help her gag Sylvia and dump her into scalding baths. so that Baniszewski could literally rub salt into Sylvia's open wounds. At least once, Baniszewski and a 12-year-old son, John Jr., rubbed urine and feces from a diaper into Sylvia's mouth. They then gave her half a cup of water, and that is all she had for the rest of that day. You would think it could not get worse, but it does. By the end of October, Sylvia was in extreme starvation. John Jr. gave her a bowl of soup and promised that she would be able to eat it with her fingers, and then he took it away. She was forced to insert that bottle into herself again, and she was ordered to come into the kitchen. While there, Baniszewski used a heated needle to brand Sylvia with the phrase, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Sylvia's abdomen. She had a neighbor, 14-year-old Richard Dean Hobbs, finish the branding. He then took her to the basement again with 10-year-old Shirley Baniszewski, where they proceeded to attempt to brand her again with an anchor bolt. Later that day, Baniszewski would have neighborhood children over again to see the words carved into young Sylvia's body. A little later still, Sylvia told Jenny that she could tell that she would die soon. The following day, Baniszewski forced Sylvia to write a letter to her parents saying that she had run away. She was to fill the letter with accusations against unknown neighborhood boys for beating, abusing, and torturing her after she agreed to have sex with them. Baniszewski planned to have John Jr. and Jenny take Sylvia into some woods nearby and abandon her there to die. She was offered some crackers to eat as some sort of sickening last meal, and when she refused them, they were forced into her mouth while Baniszewski and John Jr. beat her again. Sylvia tried to escape that last day, but she was so injured and so weak that she was not able to get out of the house. Foy Hubbard and Baniszewski beat her so severely with a curtain rod that the rod was bent into a right angle. She banged on the walls of the basement, desperate for any sort of help. A neighbor heard the commotion but decided that because it ended at around 3 a.m., he wouldn't tell anybody about it. By morning, Sylvia was no longer able to speak or move properly. The end was very, very near. Baniszewski tried to give her some milk and a donut, which she was not able to take by that point. So Baniszewski threw her on the floor again and returned her to the basement. Sylvia had become delirious. Paula tried to force her to recite the alphabet and stand up, threatening to jump on her if she failed. Sylvia defecated on herself instead and was ordered to clean herself up. Later that day, the tormentors gathered in the basement. John Jr. sprayed her with a garden hose, brought into the house by Randy Lepper. Baniszewski stomped on her head. Richard Hobbs showed up just as Baniszewski ordered Paula to clean up Sylvia. Stephanie and Richard would take her to a warm, soapy bath and lay her out on a mattress in a bedroom. Just 16, she would take her last breath as Baniszewski screamed to her children and to her other tormentors that Sylvia was faking her death. She then beat Sylvia's body with a book and told Richard to call the police. She would hand police that letter she forced Sylvia to write, claiming that she had been nursing the poor girl for the hours before she died. Paula grabbed a Bible of all things and swore the death was meant to happen. Jenny, however, whispered to officers, "You get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." It was the one thing she was able to do for her sister Sylvia. Police arrested Baniszewski, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. for murder. Foy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested. All were held without bail. Baniszewski would deny involvement and try to pin all the abuse on Paula and Coy. Paula, without remorse, signed a confession to her role. John Jr. would also admit to some of his role and implicate his mother. 5 other neighborhood kids, Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Anna Sisko, were all arrested within 3 days of the death and charged with causing injury. Sylvia suffered more than 150 wounds on her body and was extremely emaciated when she died. Her fingernails had all been broken backward, her vaginal cavity was swollen shut, and her lips had been basically chewed to near non-existence. Baniszewski pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and the others all claimed that they had been pressured by Baniszewski. So much for anyone taking any responsibility at all for the horrendous torture of Sylvia. Although Stephanie would not be tried, testimony against her at the trial revealed her role in the torture. Marie would testify to her own actions and that of her mother and siblings and neighbors as well. Along with the school and the neighbors, a Baptist priest would testify that he too knew about the abuse, but figured that Sylvia was being punished and failed to report it. Baniszewski was convicted of murder. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder. John Jr., Hobbs, and Hubbard were convicted of manslaughter. Baniszewski and Paula received life, and the others received 2 to 21 years. Baniszewski and Paula would appeal, be granted a new trial, and Paula would plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter while her mother was convicted a second time for murder. Paula's sentence was changed to 2 to 20 years. She tried to escape twice and was released in 1972. Baniszewski was paroled in 1985 against great public opposition, and she changed her name to Nadine Van Fassen. She'd found God and claimed to be a devout Christian by then. 40,000 people signed a petition opposing her parole. She still minimized her responsibility, and yet there she was on parole. She would continue for the rest of her waste of a life to say she could not remember what her role in everything was. Or it was medication that made her abusive, or it was the children. She died of lung cancer at age 61. Paula would change her name to Paula Pace and lie about her background to get a job as, can you believe this, a school counselor. After 14 years, the school board uncovered her real identity when they were tipped off, and she was fired. Stephanie became Stephanie Zerkstad and became a school teacher, having several children of her own, and she lives in Florida. The youngest of Baniszewski's children were all taken into care and their names legally changed. Marie and Dennis have both passed on. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John Jr. all served less than 2 years in a reformatory before being paroled, and Hobbs died of lung cancer at the age of only 21. Hubbard stayed on in Indiana, gathered up a criminal record, and died of a heart attack. John Baniszewski Jr. became John Blake, a lay minister, and he died of complications due to diabetes. Charges against the other kids in the neighborhood were eventually dropped. Cisco, Lepper, and Monroe have all passed on. Unfortunately, Jenny died of a heart attack at age only 54, and her parents are also passed. The house where all this happened was demolished and is now a church parking lot. In 2001, the community erected a granite memorial to Sylvia in Willard Park. This case, this horrible death, did not have to happen. So many people knew what was happening and failed to report it. Indiana, though, partly as a result of this case, now has mandated reporter laws that apply to everyone. In Lebanon, Indiana, Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center is an NGO that stands up for vulnerable kids and helps them to deal with trauma. And that is the legacy we should remember from this case. That we need to prevent children from having these types of traumatic experiences. And for those that do, They need all the support and all the love that we can give them. Thank you for listening. Until next Thursday. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.